Oh, sorry.
Now she
Yeah.
can. We have to keep the boss happy.
Okay. No worries. And I just want to preface it that this presentation is more so data to inform policy, and we'll loop in at the end a different opportunity to engage with policy proposal.
Great, yeah, so thank you for having us here. We decided to split this time into two parts. Alicia, my colleague, and I will talk about the broader scope of housing and homelessness in the Valley and the region. And then I'll pass it over to my colleagues, Patrick Vitelli and Janelle Vino. Patrick and Janelle are both from the Department of Sociology. Patrick's a professor and Janelle's going into her 4th year. So thank you both for being here. And so we're going to have kind of a broad scope and then zoom in on Wolfville specifically, and very specifically the student experience, which we're very grateful that you're here to do that with us. We'd like to start by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Homeless No More is an organization that Alicia and I have been working very closely, and we're very dedicated to working with our partners in Bear River, Annapolis Valley First Nation, and Glooscap. And we can explore that more if you have any questions at the end. What is a service-based? Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
So we wanted to start with just saying, what is it that we're talking about? And we use the term homelessness a lot, but there's a lot of nuance to what homelessness means and how people define it. And so when we're talking about homelessness today, we're talking about a broad spectrum of what homelessness is. It's complex. And it captures people who are on the brink of homelessness, at risk of homelessness, and vicariously housed, living rough, couch surfing, et cetera, et cetera. So when you hear us talk about homelessness, we're talking about a very broad definition, and that in rural Nova Scotia, in rural places in Canada, it appears very differently than in urban centers. So that being said, we are looking at a, that's okay, this is great. We are looking at a service-based count, which counts the number of people who are homeless in a certain region. And so the region that we're looking at and we'll speak to today are from Digby County all the way to West Hants. And then we'll zero in a little bit on Kings County in our presentation. So what is a community support and service-based count? The first time this was ever done was actually in PEI, and the first time in Nova Scotia that it was done was in Cape Breton. Cape Breton University and the Nova Scotia Health Authority first did this in 2016 in their region. And then we first did it in 2020 in our region with the lead researcher being Lindsay Slade, who you now have the pleasure of working with in Wolfville. And so this is our second service-based count that we did in 2022 in November. The service-based count is an estimation of homelessness that we collect information from service providers. So it's very different from something you might have heard before, which is a PIT count or a place and time count. Place and time counts are done extensively in Canada to count people who are homeless, and it's very effective in urban centers. But what we have found in homelessness research is that it's not very effective in rural places because rural homelessness is hard to count. And that's because it is hidden. It looks a lot different in urban centers. So the best practice right now, and it's not perfect, there's a lot of issues to it, and we can also look at those nuances. It's to collaborate with service providers to count how many people they can identify as being housing insecure or homeless at a time. So our time frame was November, the whole month of November in 2022, where we asked service providers from Digby to West Hants to count the number of people that came through their door, that texted them, that emailed them, that would present as housing insecure or homeless. They filled out a survey that had 24 questions, so we got some really good nuanced information about their demographics and their housing situation. The major limitation of this research is that you have to be connected to a service. And so we miss people that are off grid, that are not connected. So we know that we have a number based on our research, but we know anecdotally that it's a lot higher. So I think that's important to know. And we can, again, get into the details of methodology if you have any questions about that. So just to reiterate, the definition of homelessness that we use is from the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, and we're looking at unsheltered, which is probably what you think of when you think of homelessness. Emergency sheltered, so people that have shelter for one night, a few nights, a few weeks, but it's not for a long time. Provisionally accommodated, and that would also include incarceration or in hospital settings, and then at risk of homelessness. So there's a lot of nuance to this, which is why we work very closely with our community partners who are on the ground working with these individuals and families. And so we call this work, or this research, action research. And Alicia and I, as the research team, are really supported and driven by the community partners that we have.
So let's get into the data. So again, as Mary mentioned, we know these numbers are just a glimpse. So when you're looking at them today, I just invite you to remember that each number on this screen is an individual between West Hants to Digby right now in our communities, and perhaps a neighbor or someone else who's directly in Wolfville. So our service providers were able to capture 231 individuals known to be experiencing homelessness, again, between West Hants to Digby. In addition to that 231, there was 124 children identified as being connected to those individuals. The average age of someone experiencing homelessness within our region was 28, with the highest age groups being between 20 to 29 and 30 to 39. And down kind of in the bottom there, you can see the scope of gender identity. We have about 50-50 identified as male and female, with less than 5% for both non-binary and unknown. So as we move through the data, there's a lot of things on the slide. So some of them I might move quickly, but there is opportunities to engage with this. And you do have a printout in front of you that speaks to the rural, a bit of the regional data, as well as to Kings County. So what you see on the screen here is the housing situation for our region. So the number one was provisionally accommodated, and Mary spoke to kind of the nuance of that. So that's 44.5% of folks within our data were experiencing that, and 25.5 were at risk, 16% unsheltered, and 12.5 emergency sheltered. The unique thing about this statistic is it shows opportunity for prevention, that we have a high number of folks who are at risk of switching into unsheltered or emergency sheltered if nothing was to change. However, we're at a situation where if we take action, we might be able to support those folks from not falling into that demographic. So where does the individual reside? So where do they identify as their home community? You see the number one number up on there or the largest number is in Kings County with 116 folks residing there, followed by West Hants and then Annapolis County. And so 45% of the individuals who are in Kings County do reside in Kentville. And as a reminder, this data comes through service providers. And if we think of the town of Kentville, we inherently know there's a lot of service in that community. So where is the individual accessing support? It's clear that, again, Kentville is very high, followed by Windsor, Middleton, etc. There was a lot of communities listed on this list, Wolfville being one of the ones that was listed under less than 10 in terms of accessing support in their community. So the average age, again, not to dive too deep into this, but this really gives you a visual representation of how many folks are between 20 and 39 within our age demographic to be experiencing any form of homelessness. This is the statistics on income, and this graphic really speaks to the idea that folks who do meet the definition of homelessness are not without any income. There is income assistance. Some folks are part-time employed or full-time employment or receiving the child tax benefit. However, this does speak to the greater issue that there isn't necessarily sufficient support within that for individuals. So has the individual been compromised? This is an issue that's coming up across the valley in different conversations. Some communities are stepping into taking different actions in terms of recognizing or being preventative when sexual exploitation in particular is happening in their community. We did have 23 folks known to be experiencing that, as well as 14 criminal exploitation, etc. These numbers are hard, as we know this is connected to shame for an individual or experience. So it's hard to bring that forth to a service provider or someone who's supporting you. When we asked folks what is keeping them from finding a place of their own, the number one answer is that rents are too high in their community. 182 are low income. 173 feel there are poor housing options available in their community where they choose to reside. And that's followed by different implications from mental health and family conflict, which impacts any human, no matter what your situation. So what are some of the assets? This is a unique question. This kind of shows how in a account such as this, we get a richness of data that's different than a PIT count. So we were able to dive into what sort of supports do people still have. We have really high numbers around community connections. Oddly, we have a really high number around access to primary care and a family doctor. And that's also followed by access to family friends and supports and transportation. And this number might look very different in other rural communities. We do have a rural transportation system and communities that are kind of close to each other. They're not entirely isolated from one another. And this statistic speaks to chronic homelessness in our region. We do have 54 folks who have been experiencing homelessness for more than 2 years straight without break. And many folks after that kind of on and off within the 1 to 2 years and 6 months. And by definition, chronic homelessness happens when someone experiences homelessness for up to a full year or on multiple circumstances within 3 to 4 years. So this is an issue that's showing up in our region and in our communities. To dive into Kings County, there's a lot of things on the screen. This is also on the printout in front of you. Some things to pull that there's 116 individuals, the highest within the region that are catchment. 21 are accessing services not only in their community, but in surrounding communities. One neat layer that we'll pull in, if you look at the bottom, speaking to the 2021 census data, 16% of the individuals residing in Kings County are considered low income. And in addition to that, it also highlights that 11% of tenants in Kings County are receiving subsidized housing, which kind of shows that uncertainty around housing if you are requiring subsidies to be housed. I'm gonna skip on to this one, but you do have this in front of you, just so you know. And when we look at the breakdown in Kings County, there's a shift. Regionally, provisionally, and at risk, we're the top. When we dive into the county in particular, we have provisionally is still the top with 43% and emergency sheltered at 22.5, followed by at risk and unsheltered. There's a quote we have here that says, they have support from people who care about them. They're looking for work in more suitable housing, but yet they're currently living in a vehicle. So this data can be used as a tool, and this is just a glimpse. As Mary mentioned, we had 24 questions. It's a lot to cover in a short bit. However, we can use this tool to better inform folks, to answer questions. If groups like yourself are curious about particular data points, you're welcome to reach out for us to better inform your decision making if you're curious. And that service is the same in reciprocity between our organizations and any form of government as well. We want to support both sides and recognize that government has a lot of barriers, just as our organizations do in terms of moving this forward. So as some of you in the room are aware, in 2 weeks' time, we are getting together in Middleton to dive into the policy side of this work and what opportunities government has to move this forward in our region. So some of you, definitely your staff, and perhaps some of you on council have received the invitation to attend the Homeless No More Calls to Action happening on May 25th in Middleton. It is limited in terms of how many folks we can have in the space because we are inviting organizations and government between West Hants to Digby. So we're asking about 2 to 3 representatives from organizations to be in the room. We have policy asks for municipal, provincial, and federal that have been informed through this data, sector engagement in October, as well as additional research across the province. And we've been in communication with organizations and government to see how does this policy fit, which barriers are on which side, and what can we actually move forward. So in that conversation, We'll bring forward different policy that does incorporate collaboration between municipal and provincial for folks like yourself. That's where it would impact you. So I'd encourage you to come to that space to dive into that with us. There is facilitated opportunities to have conversations with service providers in your region and as a government support in that space. So at this time, we're going to transition to the other folks who are in the room to fill in. I guess I'll acknowledge that part of our data, as mentioned, is through service providers. So there was frankly less data in Wolfville in particular because of that, because we do inherently have less services. However, these incredible researchers have such unique data on the student experience in regards to housing. So we're going to invite them in to help fill that gap in the data for you folks. And actually, switch it over. How do you? Oh, there you are. There you go. Of course. Thank you. Sorry, Janelle, I'm going to sit behind you. No, makes sense.
Okay, so thanks so much to all of you for having us here, and thanks also to Mary and Alicia for inviting us along. I'm Patrick Vitale, and I teach in the sociology department, and I am also a Wolfville resident.
I am Janelle Vino. I am a sociology student and I am a Wolfville resident.
So in the fall of 2022, 14 students in my class set out to answer two basic questions. Is housing affordable for Acadia students? And how does the lack of affordable housing impact students? And I should note that these students were extremely motivated because they had had such difficulty accessing housing themselves. To answer those questions, we did an online survey and we collected responses from 735 students. So that's 20% of the student body. We also interviewed 14 students.
Today we will discuss the affordability of housing for students and the struggle to find housing. Then we'll talk about the impact of housing costs on students. Finally, we will present evidence of housing insecurity among Acadia students.
Our survey picked up very few complaints about on-campus residence. The primary complaints about residence was that it was expensive and inflexible. So those were the main complaints about on-campus housing. Because off-campus housing is limited and expensive, many students can't turn to, because on-campus housing is expensive, students turn to off-campus housing instead. And you can see the average rent that a student pays per month, this is per student, is around $649, but many students pay significantly more. The high cost of housing in the community results in students missing payments, and 18% of the students surveyed had not been able to pay housing costs at least once over the past year.
So when we look at the affordability of housing for students, we're not only looking at the rent per month. We're looking into all the housing related costs put together and determining if the price can be paid without difficulty by the average student. Through survey and interview data, we've determined that although an individual may not miss a rent payment, they may go without essentials in order to pay for housing. For example, one interviewee stated, "I don't live large, but I had to live really small," referring to cutting back on essentials that were already minimal. Another interviewee told us that they had to purchase cheap, processed food in order to afford rent. This is also reflected in our survey data. 44% of students said they spent less on food in order to afford housing over the last year. We also found that 39% of students did not buy a textbook mandatory for their course in order to pay for housing. Many interviewees spoke about their struggles to find affordable, adequate housing near campus. One participant spent months looking for a place. She eventually found an expensive apartment in Hansport that lacked internet or sufficient water for bathing or washing dishes. She moved out just weeks after moving in, stating that her hunt was really difficult. Another interviewee agreed, stating that it was extremely hard to find housing from Kentville to Windsor, while another interviewee spent months looking and struggled to find anything near campus.
We asked students what percentage of their income they spend on housing, and a widely used measure of affordability is spending 30% of less of your income on housing. Those who spend more than 30% are considered housing stressed, and those who spend more than 50% of their income are considered extremely housing stressed. And what we found is that 48% of students are housing stressed and 28% are extremely stressed, meaning that they spend more than 50% of their income on housing. You can also understand why this measure is a little bit less than ideal for students because they don't always have a sense of what their income is. And so you can see that 182 students said they just didn't know what percentage of their income they spent on housing. We then decided to compare housing stressed and unstressed students. So students who are paying more than 30% of their income and students who are paying less than 30% of their income. So in the left-hand column, you'll see students who are not stressed. And in the right-hand column, you'll see students who are stressed. And what we found is that students who are housing stressed are more likely to work during the school year. They're more likely to rely on loans to pay for housing. They're less likely to have family support. And they're facing significantly higher debt loads when they graduate from university.
The majority of students fund their housing through employment, whether during the summer or part-time and even full-time during the school year. Work schedules can take a heavy toll on students' academic and personal lives. As an example, one interviewee stated they worked 3 jobs while also being a full-time student, where another student struggled to do their schoolwork during breaks at a demanding job.
Through interviews and surveys, we learned that students' mental and physical health, stress levels, academic performance, and social lives are all significantly impacted by housing-related costs. One interviewee stated that they were stressed about affording to pay rent, and another that trying to find money to live here created a lot of anxiety and stress. As Janelle just noted, many students have to prioritize working for pay instead of their schoolwork. Finally, we also found that housing costs affect students' social lives because they have less free time and are unable to afford social activities.
Stress relating to housing is often the result of affordability, or rather unaffordability. We found that students who spent 30% or more of their income on housing costs were significantly more likely to not pay housing costs on time, have to cut back on groceries, and move in with others due to financial problems. When students are busy trying to figure out how to pay rent, it's very hard for them to focus on their schoolwork. Unsurprisingly, we found that students who were housing stressed experienced episodes of housing insecurity at higher rates than those who were not. This includes not knowing where to stay or having to stay somewhere you weren't comfortable with, among many other experiences. Our interviewees told us of several occasions where students had to live in an unsafe location. One interviewee stated that they lived in a camper trailer in the parking lot at the athletics complex. 1.2% of survey respondents told us they had to stay in an abandoned building, car, tent, or other place not meant for housing at least once over the past year.
So we want to just wrap up with 5 key points that we concluded about the housing market in Wolfville and its particular impacts on students. The first point is that students rent in what we would consider to be a segmented marketplace. And what that means is that not all dwellings are available to them. Because they rent in a segmented marketplace, they oftentimes end up paying more rent for inferior housing compared to the rest of the population. The second point is that students are very diverse. Some are very privileged and have family assistance. Some receive no assistance and are supporting children and families of their own. But all of these students compete for the same limited housing in that segmented housing market. This creates an even greater barrier for students who are already structurally disadvantaged. The third point is that the lack of affordable housing on campus exacerbates housing conditions for all Wolfville residents and everybody in the surrounding region.
4. Students make many contributions to life in Wolfville. Solving the housing crisis for students would benefit all Wolfville residents and not just students. Lastly, many students cannot access affordable and safe housing that is conducive to being a student. To afford rent, they are forced to either harm their future well-being by taking out loans or currently harm their academic performance by having to work. We cannot succeed as students if we have nowhere affordable to live. Thank you for your time. We welcome your questions now or later by email.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And so you have a few minutes to respond to questions from anyone who has. Yep. Okay. Anyone have any questions? No.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. They're both eye-opening. I was recently talking to an international student and came away with the impression that although what you're describing generally is bad, that for many international students, it's far worse. You didn't differentiate that, did you?
We did not. We could have done that with our survey data. We didn't do that today. But what we know is because of the way that the housing market operates for students, in which you have to rent an apartment, usually in October or November for the following academic year, that is extremely challenging for incoming international students who may not even know that they're coming to Acadia, may not have social insurance numbers or credit reports or anything here. So it is incredibly difficult for them oftentimes to access housing. And we know that Acadia is admitting more and more international students in the coming years.
Councillor Ingham?
Thank you for all that. Would you be able to share that with council or the committee, the report that you did?
Pretty much everything we have is on these slides. We didn't write anything up, but
No, I mean the slide. Would you be able to
Slides.
share the slideshow with the
Absolutely,
committee?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd be
Just-
happy to.
Just because I'm not going to remember every single percentage and stat and everything like that, and I'd like to go back and read it. That's my first question. Thank you for that. And you did mention about lack of affordable housing on campus, and that's a little bit concerning to me. I know typically I had two of my kids went to Acadia, and basically seems popular that most people maybe will stay in residence their first year, and they are like, oh, I can get cheaper off campus and I don't want to pay the food. So what would be, has anybody commented on, I would stay on campus if they had more affordable homes or housing, and then maybe not the meal plan kind of included. And that seems to be something that's sort of missing at Acadia. Is that something you looked at?
So we didn't look at that directly, but we do know based on students' experience who do live on residence, that there are a lot of other fees incorporated in the residence fees that you don't have to pay when you're off campus. Even things such as damages in the residence, you need a meal plan, you can't go without it. And so for someone who maybe doesn't take advantage of the meal plan at all, it's not really worth it for them to stay on campus having to pay those extra fees when they don't use it. So they often look for things off campus, even though it's not most convenient.
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't go to Acadia, I went to another university, and there's other residences that are kind of more like apartment styles that you don't have to pay for food and everything. So I don't think Acadia has that sort of style of residence. Am I correct? That you can just, yeah, and usually, you know, it's not your first and second years that get in that, it's your maybe third and fourth, or say, I'll stay close to campus, but I want to have my own bathroom and my own kitchen, and they have that. And they have that at different universities. I'm wondering if that's something Acadia will look at soon. They are? Okay.
The one problem too is there's a lot of complaint about the shared kitchen facilities. So many dorms have shared kitchen facilities on the residence hall, but they are not ideal for cooking in. And so then students need to use the meal plan, and that is very expensive on top of housing, which you can see is quite expensive.
So if no more, thank you very much. That was a
Thank you.
very useful information, and I look forward to reading your slides in more detail. But that I've just learning about Acadia itself, I find very interesting. That is such a the cost is such a driver. And when you were doing it, you didn't look at other issues that would affect students wanting to be off campus. It was just the cost that you were looking at.
So we looked at a variety of different focuses. Some people looked at, well, we looked at affordability, but other people looked at the relationship between students being tenants and their landlords, just overall maintenance and things and well-being. But we decided to primarily focus on affordability because it gave us the statistics that were really important. But there are a lot of other driving factors that can impact where someone lives.
And do we have access to that, some of that information?
I can send you, I mean, people are welcome to ask me questions, so I have a very, very large spreadsheet of all the survey results, and I can pull data out of it, if it's useful, but this was classes research, so we didn't like write up a formal report or anything.
Okay.
Mostly because we ran out of time because the semester.
It was great.
But we're very happy to get to actually put it out there today.
Can I just make a comment if it's not out of turn? Thank you for your research. Thank you all. And I just wanted to acknowledge where this conversation is happening around, the responsibility of Acadia. And I agree that Acadia needs to improve its residence facilities, but I'm wary of passing the buck back to them and acknowledging that students deserve, affordable and dignified housing within our community as well. So of course, we're working on all fronts, and there are many factors, I know personally, anecdotal factors that will drive people from residence. So just mindful of the nuance of that conversation, that there's a lot we can do in our town too. So I'm grateful for your research.
If I could say one thing about that too. One thing we found is that the stigma that's associated with student renters oftentimes created a situation where landlords felt compelled to take advantage of them. So student renters were seen as renters who were irresponsible. Therefore, even if they didn't produce damages, they didn't get their damages returned. So we have data about their damage deposits, and we found that, a very significant percentage, maybe 50 or 60% of students were not getting their damage deposits returned. And landlords knew that there was very little that those students could do. Also, the conditions in the housing was oftentimes very bad. I think 40% of students complained about mold and off-campus housing. So it was a significant issues.
Very useful information. Mayor Donovan.
Thank you. Actually, I would find that information at least as, if not more interesting as we try and deal with our landlords in town on those issues. So that would be really valuable information if it's not too hard to pull it out and provide it to Devin.
Yeah,
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you.
great. Okay. Well, if no more questions, thank you very much. This has been a very interesting and useful presentation, and thank you for making the time to talk with us today.
Thank you.
So old business. Director Lake, thank you. East End draft summary, secondary planning strategy, staff report. Is that where we are?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I have Rob LeBlanc from Fathom Studios here with me today. And this is really the roundup and kind of conclusion of the journey we've been on from planning committee's perspective. But as you can see from that last presentation, there's much more work to come on the housing file and different things that we need to look at from a policy perspective. So getting into the East End here. Just a reminder, in maybe a comedic way, sort of why we started into this. I didn't want to do, 30 minutes of introduction to remind everyone where we're at, but the driving force behind this secondary planning process was really trying to come up with a better outcome and learn from what we've done, both in Wolfville and what has happened around the province through different types of development processes, mostly through things like one-off development agreements for small pieces of land. And just that's why we zoned this area comprehensive development, so we could look at a really broad area and look at the public interest and connectivity and the different issues that we've been exploring. So this little cartoon is from Jill Grant's book. She's a professor, retired professor now at Dalhousie Planning School. The book is called The Drama of Democracy. So I love this little cartoon. It's up in my office. Okay, so we're gonna debrief the What We Heard report that was in the package. I have it printed off in front of me. I didn't list every bullet point in the slides, but if there's one that I have picked out some of them just to address. If there's other ones, I think we could stop after each sort of bucket of issues and we could make sure that everyone's satisfied before we moved on to the next one, if that makes sense. So today we're looking at providing a recommendation on to council, and just a reminder of sort of the mandate of the planning committee is really to advise council before council makes a decision on a planning matter. So whether it's this really large scale process or some of the smaller issues that we deal with. So this is the motion. I do have a box there ready to edit on the fly if we need to do that. But I had sort of drafted this blanket motion just to sort of get the spirit of it in the report so people understood what we're working towards today. So I just clipped that out of the report. Just bigger picture here. What we're really trying to achieve here is a zoning framework. We're trying to take this from a comprehensive development area with essentially no development rights to something where investment expectations, all of these things can be managed, and we do that as a town through our land use bylaw primarily. And all of that and this whole process has been guided by our municipal planning strategy. So this is really what we're working towards. Of course, we've done, Rob's team is amazing at doing these illustrative plans. So this is a potential outcome of that zoning framework. And I think some of the questions today may be around, will building X be in the exact spot that we see on this plan? And so we can unpack some of that as we go through this. But just a reminder that really this has been the focus. The amendments and the details that we get into as far as amending our planning documents are really based on this framework. So these were the issues. I was working on this right up until 3:15. So they're not in the order that they're in the report because I just felt some of them were complementary to each other and we could just sort of flow through them together almost. So I might go through the first three, just sort of presenting, and because I think some of the questions are related. So if you'll bear with me, I'll just go through a few slides to introduce the first three, and then I could pass it back to the chair and we could facilitate discussion on that. You're getting blasted again. Is it okay? Okay. Just go hit the red button if you're freezing. Yeah. You're gonna turn it off? Magic finger, do I have it? Okay, I'll dive in. So just within this, I'm just gonna get my notes here. So this first bucket of what we heard issues is around traffic and parking. So in the reports that we've presented sort of incrementally over the last number of months, there's been a traffic analysis. So that's the title that you see at the top. Chapter 3 of the secondary plan is really based on traffic. The first iteration of it, really what we were trying to do there was look at Highway 101. That was a big question, certainly from my seat at the beginning of this, was how viable is this with or without? What level of service impacts will we have without? Was the big question that I had. Because preliminary discussions we had at the time with the province was that they really weren't interested in putting in a highway interchange at this location at Maple Avenue. And we don't really have another location as ideal as it could be. We're not, yeah, we're not interested. And I've said that at previous meetings, it's very unlikely we will see an interchange without some type of serious political effort or something. I mean, I think everyone knows that that's really how interchanges get built. But the analysis that we've done shows that the build out and the initial build out was at a higher density that we were modeling. And it showed that, you know, there's impacts on level of service at certain intersections at full build out. So let's say 20 years from now, and recommendations for things like left turn lanes to help traffic flows, potentially at full signalized intersection at some sections. But there's a series of recommendations in that traffic analysis. And Roger Boychuk, who has been doing traffic analysis and is a civil engineer, works at Fathom, is a very experienced person to do this. So part of the reason that I really love this secondary planning piece is often with a development agreement, the developer would give us a traffic study. So we've commissioned a traffic study. We've been able to really dig into that ourselves. The other piece, just to show here in some of the questions that have been asked, the secondary plan, what we're really trying to do is establish expectations around road profiles. Given the shuffle of engineers that we've had in the town over the last number of years, we don't have a municipal spec. A lot of places would have that. HRM would have a spec book they would hand to people and say, this is what you're building. So a lot of the things that we're trying to establish in the secondary plan is channeling the broad strokes of that. We're not getting into how much gravel is going to be under the road. That's what our engineer is doing. But as far as street trees, sidewalks, overall width of right-of-ways, on-street parking, all of these different elements, we want to ensure are upfront, and the developer knows that when they are building a road, this is what the expectation is for this area. And this has been really helpful for Alex and I working together, honestly, because we are building a set of municipal specs right now. So this will come to council in the future, but this has been a good piece of work to help with that. Parking has obviously been an issue. Parking is an issue in everything we talk about. And so some of the, I don't know why this little bar is down here. Anyway, so there will be some on-street parking. I've been asked by a number of people. So the cross sections that we're showing, some of them show on-street parking and some of them don't. For instance, the new road on the Kenny lands, we have requested, because they are moving forward with design of that, we have requested that there should be some on-street parking. What we want to avoid is the situation that we have, for example, on Sterling Avenue, where you just have general wide travel lanes. So the lanes are too wide for a residential street cross section from my perspective. But you can still have on-street parking. It just has to be designed in. It shouldn't just be you can pull over on the road wherever you want through a residential neighborhood. We're not trying to build a major highway through a neighborhood. The site plan process that all of this sets up also has detailed parking requirements. So the land use bylaw has an entire section dedicated to parking. I won't go into it here, but we have just updated this. It is, I think, a really good section on parking and requirements around that, requirements around landscaping. And we have overall hard surface requirements of having impervious surface maximums on sites. We also talk about in the land use bylaw the new zones for requiring underground parking for larger buildings. So that also makes a big difference in terms of both how much surface pavement there is and the demand on the street. So I think as we go through and we learn from this and we go back to that cartoon, we've learned a lot from the Woodman's experience. We've learned things from the West End as we've gone forward, but around parking, I think Woodman's Grove has been fairly well managed with the types of parking, and there's not sort of parking chaos, so to speak, over there. There is something else written on this slide, but I can't see it, so we'll just assume that I covered it. So the parkland and trees, these are just some notes that I wanted to sort of put on the record here. Obviously, a major focus of this entire process, the reason that we set the policy framework up in the municipal plan was around green space, livability, connectivity, being able to actually look at areas from a broader perspective, so we're not going back as people are developing smaller areas and then trying to retroactively connect things. That's essentially what we're doing in other parts of town currently, which is obviously challenging. It's possible. So our subdivision bylaw requires 10% of an open space transfer as part of a broader subdivision, which most other municipalities in the province require 5%. And so we have an equivalency where it can be 10% in just land, or it can be land and some type of combination of cash as well. So all of this stuff, as we get into sort of formal approvals and working with an approved secondary plan and moving that into building things, we administer this through what we call a servicing agreement. So we would take on the roads from the developer in stages. We would take on park space. We would take on trail development. And through that servicing agreement, we would outline the requirements that the developer has to meet. The Parks Master Plan, everyone knows, is ongoing. Some of that will certainly funnel into the East End as far as getting into more detailed programming in the park space and defining what we sort of need in different areas. The park development, and this is new, this is a new policy that we have in our municipal plan adopted in 2020. So we used to have, I would say, sort of a looser requirement around accepting park space, essentially unfinished or very minimally finished. We now have provisions around working with developers to actually finish park spaces out, at least somewhat, and can work with them on that. So we've already been working with the Kennylands developer on actually constructing a viewing platform, getting design for things like that, and building that into the servicing agreement as part of the open space transfer. Street trees, I just covered that, but they would be required on both sides of the streets, which I think is a big step forward as far as other development agreements and other streets that we've taken on in the past. I'm getting into some like really detailed comments here, and some are more general, but the Olson Pond area was something that was mentioned in the comments. Obviously, at this level of detail that we're working at, we still need to get into detailed design in that space. But I think people should know that the pond needs to function as an actual engineered piece of stormwater management infrastructure. And right now, it's really not doing that. There's water flowing down from an undeveloped area. And certainly water is going to act differently when things are developed. And the last piece to keep in mind, because I do think it's hard to probably keep in your mind the sort of different layers of regulation that play out over time as something is zoned and then someone comes in and actually makes an application. So when someone comes in for a site plan application, we actually have a requirement that they have to hire a landscape architect. So they have to show us a landscape plan for the site. And that's, from my seat, a very positive requirement. A lot of places don't have that. But it certainly helps with having sites be more park-like, and that was reflected in the comments. People generally saying they would really like to see things developed in such a way. So just broadly, we tried to highlight the green spaces as in the secondary plan and really show them clearly, so folks could understand what areas would be protected or altered and then protected. The other piece that came up is that green arrow. And I think that's very possible. I actually met with the owner of that property where it makes sense to have a connection through there, and he was very keen to work with us on that. So I think in a future iteration of that, we'll revise this plan and show an easement, a trail easement through there. And I'm planning on contacting him just to get into some details about that, but I think that's very positive. And just on the right side, there was a question in what we heard around who builds things. And the expectation is that in the local area around the developer's site, or in some aspects, there may be broader areas developed, but the expectation will be that the developer is building the trails to our standard, generally in the locations that we're showing here. This is basically just showing the combination of trails, sidewalks, some of the crossings that would be required. Not all of them, but we're just trying to highlight that there would have to be safe pedestrian crossings as well. But this is just sort of bringing all of that together in an image. So I think, yeah, I'll stop there. And that's a few different areas, but I really felt they were all related. So that's the traffic and parking, roads, trails, AT, parkland, and trees, if you have the document in front of you.
But do we have questions for Director Lake? Carolyn and then Kelly.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna go back to the traffic topic. At the open house, a lot of the people that I talked to, when they brought up traffic, it wasn't anything to do with traffic within the development, which, you know, of course, the road network is kind of the make or break of any community and super important, but everyone's concerns seem to be on traffic to through Main Street, through the four-way, and parking along the downtown, and just what the congestion would do to drive through the town. So I just wanted to circle back on that as it related to that aspect of the town, and if also just to ask if the traffic analysis was done on the impact to downtown, or if it was only looking at the new development.
The great thing about working with Roger is that he's looked at this intersection. So the two things are certainly connected, and looking at the overall town flow is something that we're concerned with. We have a budget item, I want to say it's next year, to look at this intersection in more detail. I was looking at the mayor there.
It's been on the budget since my first term on council.
Okay.
So hopefully it comes up soon. I don't know.
I think Alex is really motivated to look at it. And certainly the four-way stop.
It was actually in the budget to go in about 4 years ago, and then it inexplicably got taken out.
And then the other piece of that, because we've done a lot of work around parking in the downtown, there are some opportunities to create more parking in the downtown. I think some of that ties into the parks plan. When you look at an area like Roby Tufts and you look at the amount of surface parking that's in this really prime area in our downtown, there's some trade-offs that have to be made from a sort of policy and strategy level up from council. But there's an opportunity at Railtown to expand the public lot that we have there. We also have been working with Acadia and the rail line to expand the parking at the end of Dykeland. So really the opportunities for, I would say, larger surface parking are on the edge of town. The other big thing that's ongoing is the East End parking lot. And so we have money set aside for this summer to be working in there. And so between this construction season and next, there'll be more parking spots added there as well. So I don't know if that helps. The other piece that I would throw in there is just we are making substantial investments in active transportation, which is meant to help people not be driving downtown all the time.
I should say as well too, that when Roger did his traffic study, so he has a complete traffic simulation where it's put in, you can see cars coming and going, but he does look at offsite impacts as well. So he looked at kind of all the extending roads that head out from the site and the impacts on those roads. And I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I believe, you know, the first 10 years of this, there's really no offsite problems, but as you get into full build out of the development, it will require looking at signalization and left turn, dedicated left turn lanes and those other things. So that's all in the report.
I have two questions if that's okay. First one on kind of the similar issue of flow and congestion downtown. That was definitely a hot topic for sure, and sometimes less about parking, but more just about, yeah, congestion and safety. So Devin, I wonder if there's any indication you can give us around if the active transportation network that's going in this East End development is great. Can we expect an AT network going through the rest of town to come online at a comparable, like around the same time? Or because to me as a cyclist, there's no impact if we have active transportation in one area and not in the other. So is there any indication around that? And then my second question is, it's great that we have some of the developers doing some of the trail work and park work, and that there's a landscape architect. Are there any parameters we can have for ecological considerations, or can we make any of those requests in terms of how the land is terraformed? I mean, if you go up there right now, like it's pretty intense to look at from an ecological perspective. So just curious if there's any stipulations we can have in terms of that landscape architect and that trail building plan to ensure ecological considerations to have some impact on the species that we're putting back in. Yeah, I hope those are both clear.
Yeah, just maybe on the I think we've got a few pieces left to add to the report, the species diversity, when we're looking, you know, starting to do some work, previous Dow prof on the urban forest plan, Dr. Peter Dunker, but I've worked with Dr. Dunker on countless projects, and so we'll be looking at kind of an adaptive management plan, I'm sure, going forward with that urban forest plan. But we're going to build in a species list for trees and for on-site. So we'll have a plant list, and there'll be a palette of make sure there's species diversity built into this, and not to make sure that we're not you know, recommending white ash and plants that we know have problems right now. So that's yet to come in the final version.
Just on the AT side, I think everyone here is familiar with the funding that we've applied for through the province and the federal government. We're hopeful that all of that will come through, and the funding has to be spent by 2027. And so if we're successful with that, then the rollout of the sort of comprehensive AT network that we had applied for would probably happen before this, realistically, before this is built out or any substantially built out. Yeah, and the amount was about $3 million of investment.
I'm not sure, Devin, that everyone is familiar with the funding that we've applied for.
So the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, similar, that has funded our sewer treatment plant, phase 1 and beyond, has other streams. One of them is an active transportation stream. So we were pursuing that for a couple of years, actually. It was an intensive process. So that has come to an end, and we're just sort of awaiting a final decision on that. But again, we're very hopeful that that is going to come through. And so I think that would, again, sort of supplement some of those traffic concerns, hopefully. I also think that will create some tension in the community, obviously, about where the values and the priorities are being spent around AT versus other priorities. So that, I think that always comes with levels of change, reallocating the right of way for pedestrians versus vehicles.
Councillor Ingham.
Devin, I wonder if you could touch on, or if you know anything. Today I was walking and somebody stopped me and asked me about, I'm not against this development. Obviously, I'm not against development. We have to grow, et cetera, et cetera. But what about the schools? Like that seems to be a big piece for a lot of people with younger children. Have you looked into that? And do we have any answers to sort of say how it's going to look possibly?
I don't have definitive answers. I've reached out to the school board a few times. We've talked to people that do school planning. Our understanding is that school sites currently are being sited on extremely large parcels of land, sort of in the 10-acre range, sort of on either side of this, it would be a third of the entire site. So we're not thinking that these lands are a candidate for a new school. We have also heard a few different things about Wolfville School that it's, I heard the other day it was under and it was at, and it was, so you hear it's way over. Okay. Okay. So yeah, it's dealing with the province, and I mean, I was sort of grilled on healthcare as well at meetings, and how does this play into our healthcare problems and crisis in the province as well? I mean, I really don't have an answer to those things, but
Yeah, and I don't think it's a solution. It's something that we can't solve on, like Wolf can't solve on its own. So I did say that, but I think that messaging for people, as we move on in development, how will that handle, I guess, but we don't know is the answer really right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carolyn?
Can I just ask a procedural question? Are we going back to the rest of your topics? Like before we dive into the school piece, I was kind of anticipating it coming up later. Okay, I just want to check in when the appropriate time to.
Yeah, maybe, do you want to speak to this one, the stormwater piece?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been conscious all the way through this that we're looking at a no net runoff approach. We want to make sure that whatever runoff is currently leaving the site will be leaving the site the same volume and frequency and duration of runoff as when it's fully developed. So to that end, we've looked at stormwater gardens. We've looked at on-roof storage. Like there's a number of ways that developers can choose to do that. We think that kind of a network approach of identifying as part of the parks and open space, integrating stormwater management features. These are not engineered stormwater ponds. These are, they look and act like park spaces, but integrating those in, there's only a number of locations that they can happen, just the natural fall of the land here. So we've identified 5 that we think are candidate sites for kind of major facilities, but that also leaves developers open to explore individual options, which could be subsurface drainage features or stormwater gardens or any other number of ways to deal with that.
And I just want to add, just out of the notes here, I think there was some concern around the ravines. We would call these sort of natural assets that are dealing with stormwater already. There has been some infilling along the Kenny, we'll call it the Kenny Creek. And part of the engineering design that's ongoing is to restore that so it is a more functional piece of infrastructure. The other piece that is important to note here is there is a large culvert that runs under our entire compost site that is a part of stormwater management infrastructure, which terminates at a culvert going under Main Street that we're replacing this summer. So that over many years that culvert's been in there, it's had a lot of water flow through it, obviously. And yeah, the replacement of the culvert under the compost site will help with that overall, as Rob said, sort of systems approach to looking at this. Do you want me to just move on a couple more or? Okay. 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 There's a couple that are more substantial, so I'll, okay. So this was another category. I think there's some, I'll call it misinformation about some of these pieces. And I would say that these pieces are very nuanced as far as the technical and the engineering of these pieces goes. I'm going to speak in broad generalities around our water and sewer infrastructure here. I have in every report put a link to our town engineer's report, including multiple consulting engineers that have provided us reports and assessments on our overall water and sewer systems. So those have been included. Not a lot has changed since those reports have been presented. The piece of work that's ongoing currently, because we had pump problems at our Cherry Lane well, we are continuing to model our water system. So that's happening right now. And that's the CBCL engineers piece. EXP is another engineering firm that's been working on our sewer treatment plant. So we're in the process of upgrading our sewer treatment plant to have the capacity for the growth that we're envisioning in the town. All of the growth that we're showing has been modeled in the sizing, volumetric sizing of the new infrastructure. I think it's important to note that our town engineer, although he isn't at all these meetings, him and I, we're talking every day. So his office is just down the hall from mine. He's been very actively involved in all aspects of this. To date, there's no major issues with our water and sewer system that he's identified. And this is sort of getting into the nuance is, I think if you look at any community in the country and you look at their capital program and you look at where their assets are, there's many challenges. So we're upgrading our sewer treatment plant. We are exploring an additional well through our Source Water Protection Committee. That's another piece of work that will come in the future and requires diligence on the front end. There's things like transmission lines that we're upgrading as part of our capital program, and that list could be very long. If you go into our capital budget, all of those pieces work together to build this water and sewer system that really provides the underpinning of the entire community. So we are actively upgrading those. I know the mayor and councilors can talk about the debates that happen every budget season around what capital projects are going to come forward. Our capacity as a town is limited to take on usually one major capital project a year and then other sort of more maintenance level projects. This was where the schools piece, healthcare, there was a number of other issues that were identified. Other services, yeah. I can touch on other pieces in this, but I think some of the crux of it was around what services will be offered in this village center. There was some comments, can we pick who gets to go there type of thing. So the idea here, and I think this is an ambitious idea, is to create a secondary commercial area off of Main Street. As we've been going through this, we've checked in on this concept a number of times. And I think there's been broad support for this. There was a comment, should we have another one on the Kenny lands? I think through the building of multi-unit, we do allow some commercial space in the ground floor of multi-unit, and I think there can be some of that activity that that comes on the Kenny lands as well. But I think the crux of a lot of this was around this sort of idea and expanding our commercial footprint out into the East End is what I was reading and the conversations that I was having. I'll stop there because I'm gonna get into building height and housing after this, so.
Okay, thank you. I was idly driving by the new Woodman Grove building, which they talked when they presented it to council as if it could well have commercial aspects on the ground floor, and that was kind of a selling point. And I know we can't dictate anything, but I just wondered where that one, may yet get finished. Is there any likelihood that there will be some commercial spaces there that are occupied?
I think Peter's had interest. I think he's focused on just getting that building completed. And part of what we did in the planning approvals was allow that over time. I think in his mind, it's maybe not quite there yet. So we could see another bit of commercial or service offering over there as well, but there's nothing imminent that I'm seeing. Yep.
Maybe to Rob, if you could, I have a real concern about the back of the village center. If you think of the back of the stores on Main Street, they're very unattractive. That's where the garbage is. And you have that backing immediately, like within almost as close as I am to Alicia, to the park. So, and not in none of your drawings do I see any features that would say that if you're in that very, very small park, would you not be looking at the back of a store with all the garbage bins and garbage that inevitably is behind an area? Seems to me that we should be very deliberate about having some kind of interface so that you're not, so that we don't create that situation. I mean, we have it at the back of the stores on Main Street because of when they were designed, but surely that is not what you're suggesting here.
No, I think, and just to reiterate what Devin was saying, the plans that we're showing is one potential future of how this could build out. And we're trying to weigh a whole bunch of issues when we're laying these out. Number one is when you have commercial, most commercial developers will tell you that underground commercial doesn't work as well. They want to park in a surface parking lot. And so to do that, we've got a policy in the current plan that says you can't park between the street and the building itself. So it starts to limit where the parking can go. So I guess when we were laying this out, we saw this as, through the daytime, it offers you parking for the village center in the rear. But it also doubles as parking. It opens up the interface between Olson Park as well. And we'd expect that there'd be
Olson Park is the size of a football field.
Yeah.
Tiny.
Yep. And through there, we've got a drainage swale, so it's down quite low. But we expect that there'll be at least one level of underground parking. So what's the current?
I guess I'm
grade?
not interested in the parking. I would expect to see, and when this comes to council, I will want to see it before I can approve it, is that there's some policies that say where there are interfaces, whether it's an interface between a commercial area like this and a park, or whether it's an interface of anything else, that we've taken that into consideration. I haven't seen that discussion yet.
So there was a couple of things though that I was trying to get to, and you had said first that making sure that it isn't just the back of house backing onto that parking lot. And so I think we can handle that neatly through the policy changes to make sure that this is where parking comes in. So it means your storefront also. So it's a double facing commercial. You have to face onto the inner park and you have to face onto the parking lot. And we'll have to carefully control where garbage and back house type uses happen. And then I think secondly, you're also saying that interface, the buffering could be grade changes, it could be planting, it could be landscaping, all those sorts of things has to be addressed as well.
Correct.
Carolyn?
So my question has already been brought up, but I'm just wondering really if there's more clarity that can be had on it or communicated to the public, because I think this is the key issue of trust and communication, and that's around this village center, and if we can and have any ability to define any of the services in that area. I feel like we've bounced around this topic a lot, and school, I talked to 8 people that said, we need a school, we need something. I think if the answer is there's not enough space, like that could be communicated. But I think the gray zone that we're sitting at, where there's a really deep desire for certain things like a school, like services. I mean, this wonderful presentation that we had before, indicates that if we don't have services, we're not supporting a lot of people in our area, and we're not able to track certain things. If the answer is no, we actually can't do this under this, this maybe shows that I'm a little naive on some of these things still as I'm learning. But I think that was such a huge topic and ties into who we want in our community. Thinking about, that age range of younger people, people with families, people that are going to be working in potentially these new commercial development service work, that age range that we know is that we're lacking places, housing, which we'll get to, and services in our community. So I guess my question is there any clarity we can bring to the public on this topic around schools and services and other institutions that could be defined or not in the mixed use area?
We have a limited role, so we define what uses are permitted, and land use planning is a permissive exercise. So if it's not there, it's not permitted. So we can go through an exercise of having a very limited number of uses, which I think in an area like this, you do want to provide some range. A lot of uses also fall into broader buckets of things. But I think, like, from my seat, this area needs more shepherding. I would say, like, I kind of wear 2 hats. One is the planning and more regulatory hat, and the other one is a more economic development side to it, and trying to bring what you're saying, the right things, or turn away other things, so to speak. And I think this area needs that. And I don't think this is imminently moving forward. And so I think there's time to go through a bit more of a process and define perhaps more of a role for the town in this area. I've had different conversations. I'll get into a little bit in the housing section around some discussions I'm having with a somewhat new resident, Sean Gadden, who has a lot of housing experience, and about this area and some of the other aspects of the East End and how some of this stuff can translate to what we really want. I think some of the other comments that, will this be a strip mall? No. Like, the built form standards that we have in here are very prescriptive. And so if someone brings a strip mall proposal to us, we wouldn't even consider that. It's just not permitted. And so that's why I think this area will be a little more difficult. We may see more of a development agreement situation, maybe a bit more consideration by council for something as someone gets into detailed design. And I think that would be, to me, this area maybe deserves that. Particularly if we're taking on such a substantial amount of, at this point, land ownership could change, but at this point, there's one landowner that's essentially, we're putting a park and a road through the bulk of their land. And Rob talked about all the different considerations we're doing as we're doing these layouts. One of the main ones is some level of equity between the existing parcels that exist and the existing ownership that's there. But I hear you on, it would be really nice to have certain uses there, and some of it we're really not, I would say we're really not in the driver's seat for, and some of it I think we can do a better job of influencing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think people just need to hear that. So what you just said was reassuring to me, and I think that's whether it's a miscommunication or just like a lack of understanding, but I think as we move forward with this, that I found is a key area of trust that maybe can be communicated, that we hear people's concerns and that there's potential there. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Devin, I'm wondering if when you talk to the school board or whatever they call themselves now, we don't have school boards, I know that the children in grade 5 to 8 from Gasborough School are bused into Wolfville. I also understand Ellie Shaw is not full. I could be wrong on that, but it wasn't full. So certainly it would be my hope that rather than say busing future children from Wolfville to Ellie Shaw, that the Gasborough children who are already being bused into Wolfville go to Ellie Shaw. I don't know if we have any influence on that or if they're thinking that, but it would be nice to be, because I don't know how many children there are. There could be as many as 50, 75 or more, or 100 kids coming into Wolfville School who are not from Wolfville. That would be helpful to know, to be able to say, not room for school here, but children who live in Wolfville will go to school in Wolfville.
I'll try to bring back more on that. I've tried a couple angles, and I think I need to maybe sit down with someone who has that kind of data in front of them.
I just want, I'm trying to think of how many years ago, because my son would have been grade 6 or 7. So maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago, that was talked about. So my son potentially could have gone to Ellie Shaw and in the middle school, like it's grade 6, 7, and 8. So that was potential. And it didn't go over well at all because my kids were walking to school. So now all of a sudden they're going to be bused. So this topic has been brought up before as we're growing, and I can't remember exact year. I'm trying to count back from 20 or 24. Yeah. So yeah. So that this has been discussed and it didn't go over well with the public at all.
I just want to, just to add to the school thing, I just also want to make sure that we're like, what I see is not just about the school, but it's about the daycare, and it's about the after school care. Like school gets out at 2:30, people can't stop work at 2:30, and there's just nothing in this town to support the kids after school. Doesn't exist. So I know that's just like a private thing, right? I mean, it's just like any other business, but back to your point, I mean, how can we look at getting more support for our kids and our families, and, you know, make sure that we don't have a whole bunch of vape shops. So.
I guess it kind of goes along with what Carolyn was saying a little bit. I think what I heard from a lot of people, they really appreciated like the overall scope, how big it was. There was a lot, I had a lot of comments about, but I won't be around to see it when it's finished. You know, is this going to take 10 years, 20 years, whatever? I think in my mind, I'm thinking the communication piece is huge. So I don't know if it's feasible or not, but to chunk it a little bit, say like in the next 2 years, we're looking at roads, whatever. The services at the village center probably won't be decided for another 10 years. And who knows 10 years down the road where technology is, where the town, like I wonder almost like even if, once a year something comes out, like in the East End project update, we put roads in and constructed X number of houses. In the next 2 years, we're planning to build, 3 large, dense built, whatever. It just,
Yeah.
I know, and I know from where at my end, it would be great because if you don't, then people talk and rumors start and all that kind of stuff, right? So I just think if people sort of have an idea, okay, we're not going to talk about services for another 5, or it's not going to be, a school won't happen next year. It won't happen, like just getting that idea out.
It's a very good idea. Thank you.
Madam Chair, yes, to that point, and I've mentioned it a few times, we need a communication strategy and a plan. And I think we're at the point now where that should be prepared. And it would be something that this committee could weigh in on and also would help us with our messaging like locally. But yeah, I think it's time. I've been told we're going to get one, we're going to do one, but there's so many elements of this, both from the broader messaging, but also the very specifics as you're just repeating. And we had some talk about that when we did our tour, and certain things that are happening now on the site level that we could really, just with some simple steps, get people understanding more about what's happening. So I just wanted to emphasize that.
Thank you. Okay. Did you want to continue, Devin?
So I'm going to go through some housing pieces. I think I'll just go through the two pieces that I think there's some desire to talk about from the notes is the building height and the affordable housing. So I'm going to present probably like 5 or 6 slides, just go through that and then we can stop there.
Okay, I just wanted to point out, we've got 30 minutes left.
Okay.
And you've got about 4 areas you want to cover?
Yeah, the last ones I think are pretty straightforward.
Okay.
I'll try to go somewhat fast here. So the building height has been discussed throughout. We do have a desire, I think, on the private investment side to have as much height as possible. Like let's be serious. That I think that's the reality of the business of development. So I think we've landed in a reasonable spot. Most of the land is limited to 4 stories or 3 stories. So, and the view plane protection, the wisdom of the view plane protection, to give credit to whoever was the person that put that policy in play, I think that's really benefited certainly my seat in sort of navigating this and all the different parties that have interest in this project. The reason that we're showing this this detail on the left is because the way that we calculate building height is from the grade around the building. And so the grades on, particularly on the Kenny lands, aspects of the Maple Ridge lands as well, there's humongous slopes. And so through the way that the land will actually be developed to have concrete poured and podiums built and underground parking, you may have one side of the building that is a certain height. In this case, we're showing 5 stories. And the front of this building really is a 7-story building. And so a great example that is in the town is Peter's buildings from Woodman Road. They're clearly 3 stories. From the Harvest Moon Trail, they're clearly 4 stories. And that's a very slight grade change that he has on that site. It's almost nothing. So just being clear, and I think just saying this now is important because I don't want people to think that every site we're forcing everyone to create a perfectly flat plane to build on. That's actually not ideal. And that's, to your point, Carolyn, we don't want the whole thing to be completely shaped into some flat site that meets our pictures that we have in the zoning, which a lot of them are assuming the pictures we show are flat. You know, the bottom of the building is a straight line. I think that's really important. So just going through, I won't go through all of this, but if you look at these inset maps, I think the important piece, and we struggled with this throughout the process, was how do we actually regulate housing choice and force it by what areas permit what types of housing? And so we have low density areas on both sides. We added quite a bit more low density housing on the Maple Ridge side later in the process, I would say. Because that's when we're envisioning a full build out of this. And we often imagine, depending on your perspective, the worst case scenario, but the highest build out essentially is what we're envisioning in these processes. And so putting in this low density brings down that overall number, brings it down to that 16 number that we've been working around.
Can I just on that one as well too, but you'll also know that we put it where you're backing onto existing R1s, we put the low density, that makes sense. But I think even more importantly is that low density works well on the steepest sites. And where you're shown in the pink here, these are the steepest areas of the site. So if we were to put a big building on a steep site, it requires retaining walls and all kinds of costly infrastructure, and it impacts trails and streets and everything else. So putting the low density in the steepest sites, it just happens that this is the best places to put it.
And just on this low density zone, I think that this is a really great step forward when we talk about low density. This is a 1 to 4 unit zone. This is the same development rights that we've put in the development agreement for the West End. You're seeing on the ground people building singles, they're building duplexes, but I have on my desk applications for 4 unit buildings in the West End. And I think that's where things are moving in, like, nationally, internationally, sort of in in this realm. It's not just a single, very large home for only a certain type of family. The medium density, you can see again the distribution on the left. I think those little inset maps are very helpful for people to think about housing choice, housing options, housing for different types of people at different stages of their lives. That's what we spent so much time on during the plan review, was getting to a point where we're talking about choices for different people throughout their life. So this offers a range of housing types. We've shown in the illustrative master plan the highest use on these sites. And so I think that's been where there's been point of discussion around some of those sites where we showed an apartment building that could be townhomes. So this is sort of a townhome to a smaller apartment building, Peter Pauli type building. One of the smaller buildings over there would be sort of the maximum, up to 50 units. Again, this is a 4-story building height. The high density zone, I think this is where a lot of discussion is had, a lot of view plane discussion. We did the renderings really to show how this particular area, it's a small aspect of the overall 2 sites where there is some higher density and higher building heights permitted. So this is a 6-story building height limitation in this area. Do you want to say anything else about this one?
No, just that, again, this isn't your typical site where people are using height to get more units. This is just giving developers flexibility. They've got any number of ways to achieve the 16 units per acre from 10 to 16. That's kind of the sweet spot. And providing a little bit more height, 6 stories. Again, that allows, the new building code allows for wood frame construction up to 6 stories. There's a number of reasons why we picked that number, but it allows the flexibility to provide more open space. So you can imagine if we had zoned the entire site, all single family homes, it would have eaten up a lot of the open space that we have created in this plan. But allowing for these higher density, kind of the graduated density nodes, allows us to keep lots of connected open space and lots of parkland around the site, which we thought was important.
Yeah, and the other thing just to add is there's a whole nother page of additional, we call them additional built form requirements. And I'm doing a presentation tomorrow morning at the Development Officers Conference that's happening at the Old Orchard Inn, and there's a lot of additional requirements. I'm not going to go through them all, but we're regulating the built form of these buildings a lot. And so like beyond what we're regulating anything else. I'll go a little quicker, sorry. This is a 4-unit or 4-story mixed use area. This is the Village Square. Again, very prescriptive, a couple pages of additional requirements. Again, I'm more thinking that a development agreement may be a good tool in this area to have additional control and flexibility. And, you know, to the mayor's point, I think there's a lot of nuance in transitioning an area like that into the residential area. So we can come back to that. I just want to get through some slides on affordability because I think this is maybe the most important piece. Okay. I won't be that long. So we're reviewing our housing policies, and Alicia and her team were here to sort of kick that off. I have had multiple meetings now with I mentioned him earlier. He was okay with me mentioning him, a gentleman named Sean Gadden, who has a lot of experience in housing nationally. And he's been sort of advising a bit. I'm bringing him into a future planning committee meeting to do a presentation. And so we really need to get on the same page about when people are throwing around the word affordability. There's a lot of different meanings of that. And I'll get into some additional imagery around how we should probably be thinking about that. But I really think we need to write something out of this policy work that can get us on the same page. So I'm calling it an action plan here, but we can call it what we want. And I think we especially need to define our role around non-market housing, which I'll show you what we mean by that. So this is being worked on right now. I had a meeting about this yesterday. There's humongous amounts of federal funding that is being rolled out right now. So part of why I'm having some of these meetings is to see, is there an opportunity for us to tap into some of these bigger funds? The thrust of these funds is partially about affordability, but it's also, I would say, mostly about just supply. I mean, that's really the biggest problem. It's like an Econ 101 class. Like the price is going up because we don't have enough supply. I think we should all be a bit humbled by, like, everyone is struggling with this problem around affordability. And I realize that it's probably really difficult. I have a ton of conversations about this. This is the part of this whole exercise that sort of keeps me up at night, because I don't think we have a way of giving you a nice answer about how we're going to solve the affordability in town by the East End project. It's not going to do that. We are in like a national housing crisis, so it's a big deal. We've tried to build in affordability. The developers also want to build in affordability, right? They don't want to necessarily build super high-end product. A lot of them are telling me about their desires to build smaller units, smaller lots. The multifamily gives them some level of economies of scale to bring their costs down. So yeah, there's a lot of pieces to this one, but it's the current approaches really aren't working, and that's why these huge amounts of money, which are hard to get your head around, to be honest, are coming down so that new approaches can be piloted, that other ways of getting supply on the market can come. So these are slides we've shown you before, but I went back to these. I should say Lindsay went back to these and provided me with some material for this. So just in the broad strokes, reminding ourselves the enormous impacts that housing has on issues and what housing can affect as well. So I won't read through this slide, but I think it's really important. Even since 2019, 2017, when we were doing our plan review, so much has changed in the housing landscape. And that's why I'm motivated to do this policy review, because I'm not sure that our current framework responds to the realities on the ground. I think all of you have seen this before. This is one version of the housing continuum. So just on the far left, broadly, those three categories to the left, people refer to those as non-market housing categories. And to the right of the red line, we talk about market housing. I assume everyone here is living in market housing. So just getting into a little bit more detail, on the far left, we have homeless shelters. There's often systematic issues at play, and we heard about some of them before. There's supportive and transitional housing, so often being supported by nonprofits, people fleeing domestic violence. There's also a lot of programs and more programs being created all the time. In the third category, the yellow category, so rent geared to income, subsidized rental, broadly affordable housing. So these are assistance from Housing Nova Scotia. However, and I think this is a really supplemental piece to Alicia's presentation, those wait lists are really long as well. We've had that data in front of this group, people trying to get in to subsidized or program-based housing in the town, or in the region, I should say. And then moving across that red line, we have market rentals. So these are students, recent graduates, young families. This is a huge part of the market in Wolfville, so that we have people who can work at the grocery store and all of the other things that we benefit from. And moving further up the spectrum into the teal color and then blue, there's, mid-market homes and high-end housing. So I think everyone should really try to understand that when we're having affordability conversations, some people may be talking about a very specific aspect of the market, and some people may not be. Some people may have a broad understanding of the entire continuum. But I think as a planning committee, we should really try to ground ourselves in this, especially as we move into this housing policy review. So we thought it would be important to bring it back today. This was, again, we've shown you this before, but it's, how do you get people to move along that continuum? And some people are going to not have the capacity or capability to move beyond a certain point, but how do you get people out of the red, essentially, and moving into some aspect of appropriate housing? So I'm just sort of front ending a little bit of the work that we've been doing in the background around this housing policy review and some of the information that would benefit this group. So this is a map that Lindsay's been working on, just showing what we have in town currently, non-market housing. So 221 non-market units. We have almost 3,000 units in town, so this equates to around 8% of what we have in town. And I think part of the exercise we need to go through is looking at having a target. I think it's hard to work towards something without knowing where we're trying to get to. So understanding what's on the ground now and working towards something. We've been looking at our town-owned inventory. We do own various parcels of land in town that I think there could be decisions made around helping or coming in and working within the capacity of a town to help the situation, working with co-ops and nonprofits to try to do these things. So in the East End, on the Kenny side, we had set aside the piece of land along Maple Avenue. The first iterations of the plan, they were all showing this development site that the town would own. And we will still own it. In the later iterations, I'm a little unsure about the geotechnical and the engineering that will come out after we replace an entire culvert underneath the site. So we've blended that into the overall park space. But this is a site that will be created, that something could go on. That was very much sort of thinking in this realm where I think the town, the one thing we can bring to the table is not being able to build housing. It's probably having an asset that can add to the sort of pipeline of getting things built.
Can I just ask a question about that map?
Yes.
Is there not a whole lot of social housing just to the west of Highland and south of Skyway? That's not on there?
This is a work in progress.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
So
just working
more.
through this. Yeah. I just wanted to show that this is part of what we need to dig into this. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. And
14 minutes.
yeah, I'm gonna stop there. And then I have a couple other shorter ones.
Thank you. But I agree, Devin, this is a very important discussion for us to have concurrently. I mean, we would be having this discussion on housing and affordability, even if the East End project didn't exist, because it is an important issue for our community regardless. But I think it is very timely that we have this concurrently with this development issue. So thank you. Caroline, do you have a question for
I
Devin?
do. Sorry, I feel like I'm asking a lot today. Two questions. One that just came up, I suppose, after this. I appreciate what you just shared, Devin, a lot. I'm really grateful to see that up there. And I guess, Mike, I just want a little more, if you can provide really briefly a little more clarity on how that work intersects with the East End, and if there's only potential for non-market housing on town-owned land, or if there's anything that we can do now, because my worry is banking on that and then the gray zones of what's going to be affordable in the new development. So does that make sense, that question? How does this intersect?
I had written in a FAQ that we had put out around this. I think for a lot of multifamily, the financing environment right now is challenging, and a lot of people are going through CMHC to build in the 80% of market affordability. Is that actually affordable to the people that you're talking to? It may or may not be. That's why this is a challenging topic to dive into with everyone. But I think there's other opportunities there for sure. I think the policy work that we do, it's going to apply to the East End as things move forward, particularly the Maple Ridge lands. We've tried to build that into the Kenny lands, knowing that it's moving forward and trying to build in something on site. But I think there's probably an avenue to explore around something similar to our green space dedication, where we're requiring people through a subdivision process to give us green space. There also, especially with larger subdivision, there can be another mechanism where people can contribute to some aspect of housing, whether it's land or another mechanism. But these are things that we need to explore through this review that we're doing.
Okay. Can I ask another question? Is that okay?
It's okay.
Sorry. Quickly, the question that I heard like so many times the other night and was, and I appreciate that we can't put a number on what affordable housing is perhaps right now and what exactly that looks like, but is there any sense we can say, when I look at that map, like I'm not sure what is affordable housing potentially envisioned, you know, and I think that's a big concern for people. They look at it and they go, I don't think I can live here. I spoke to lots of people since last week, in my age range, that were like, I don't see a place for me here. Because of lack of clarity, you know, is the high density the only place for potentially more affordable, or does it have a view of Blomidon and it skyrockets up, you know, in cost? So if there's any sense on that piece, and I understand if there isn't, but I realize that's a big question coming up right now. People just don't know how to interact with this and understand if it's gonna work for them and their families.
Yeah. I think Devin's outlined that the supply is the key one. So by increasing supply, that means some of the current lower quality, lower cost housing won't be driven up in cost. So that's one piece that we're looking at. But the other issue is that the Municipal Government Act that governs, there's no vehicle in the act to address the affordable housing on a site by site basis, like to require 10 or 20% affordable housing in a development. HRM's been really struggling with how to do that, and what they're doing is they're taking money from developers and then they're going to put it into their own kind of non-market housing. So there is the potential for that one piece of land that if the town owned it and didn't want to do a park, that could be a more affordable housing piece, working with a co-op or something like that. So those are, it's really the way the provincial legislation is currently set up that makes it difficult to require a developer to say do 10% affordable housing in the development. We had explored at one point looking at density bonusing as part of this, that you might be able to get some, we're 16 units per acre now. Could we go to 20 units per acre if there was some portion of that extra housing that was done affordable? But the provincial act just isn't there yet.
I would just say that, so through the development agreement process, so if someone comes in, they said, hey, I potentially could build this many affordable units, but you have to give me this. It could be additional height, it could be more units beyond the density caps we've laid out. We do have an opportunity through a development agreement. It's a contract with the developer. You can be very specific. And so that is another opportunity that may come as part of this. So there's a few things that we have to sort of wait and see. At the zoning level, just putting the development rights on there and looking at this sort of spectrum of housing options that's possible, a lot of different things could come into play. And so that's why it's hard for us to sit here and talk definitively about, you know, site A is going to be an affordable housing build. It's very speculative at this point.
Councillor Ingham?
Thanks, Rob, for that clarification, because that was important to know. The Municipal Government Act, that it's not in there. my question for clarification is back a few slides probably, and Isabel and I have kind of been going back and forth on this. So was the recommendation from this committee, the 6 stories and then the 7th is like underground parking, or is 7 stories? Just, I'm just a little bit confused on that because I actually did talk to the developer today and he said that 7 stories will look like 5 stories on the grading. That's what he said to me. And in my head, I was like, oh, did we say so? What was the Yeah. And so, but that he did say, like, on the way it's grading, a 7-story building is going to look like a 5-story. That's what it'll look like from the outside, but.
Yeah, so what Devin was mentioning is that there's 2 ways to measure height on a building. One is you take the average grade around it. And so if the site kind of like in this diagram goes up towards the, say, the view plane there, the average grade, if there's a 2-story drop across or a 1-story drop across the building, you might be able to get possibly 7 stories on the front if there's 5 stories on the back. Would be the only way to do that. The other one is street line grade, so you can measure the average grade across the street and take your height from that.
Can I just, sorry, I have to follow up. So basically, as that's what this committee is proposing to go to council, like, we have. No,
height.
well, what about the motion that you have in the end? When, is that included in the height? No, but the motion wasn't clear. Like the motion didn't have everything. This is my question. Because as a counselor, me walking around, that's what I hear every single day is this height thing, which is going to be very, very big thing. And it's coming along in June. So I don't mean to, throw it out there, but I have to sort of throw it out there because if we change the building height, and I just wanted everybody on the committee to know, if we change the building height in this area, which is comprehensive development, it's the same in the Maple Ridge properties, right? It's the same development, comprehensive development, right?
No,
So if you were to change it in the Kenny lands, which people are concerned about the view plane, right? And that seems to be for, and then what about, I just need to be a little bit more clear because it's going to be coming to council and I want.
So the only area we're talking about with this height is the red area on the map.
What?
Yeah.
I know, but council is the most important thing.
So just the 2 things on your questions. It's only the red area. So there, in
Just the red area, okay.
entire town.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
anyone
Okay.
else that wanted to apply for this type of thing, it would have to come to council. It'd
Yeah.
have to go through a
Okay.
rezoning. This zone will exist. And so
Right.
the zone could be accessible to another developer who wants to come in and ask council for that. This is the only little area. There's no development rights like this on the Maple Ridge lands. And the rationale was because the Kenny lands are the only, Maple Ridge lands is not impacted by the view plane.
No, and I guess my question is because I'm getting asked a lot this area. So as we're developing in Wolfville, once, we decide, or if we decide this is a contentious issue, that we go to 7 stories, that's going to open up for, other parts of the town, the Maple Ridge, or set a precedent. I'm just throwing it out there as a committee so they know how. Yeah, that's what I didn't want to say but I don't want I want the committee to be clear because the recommendation that comes from this committee goes to council and we discuss it. So whatever recommendation you make, that's great, but still council has to sit around the table and discuss, and all of us, and I'm sure you get comments from other people too. We get comments all the time. So I want everybody to be clear, and I don't mean to be forceful on that. I just want you guys to be clear.
Can I just add one more comment? So the Kroll Tower is an existing building in the town that frankly hasn't set a precedent. We had a huge debate about building height for 3 years. And so I would push back on that idea that just because we've approved one thing, we have to approve other things. That we've carefully considered this for 2 years. But I mean, I hear you on the pressure that you would be under, but I think it's within the motion that I've drafted, building height is definitely an issue. That's why I'm highlighting it. That will have to go to council for more discussion. I think if there's a specific recommendation coming out of PAC, that should come out of PAC, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Sorry, hopefully this is quick, but it was just about your comment, Rob, that you made about how wood frame relates to building height. Can you just clarify what you meant by that?
Yeah, just the new building code allows you to do wood frame construction up to 6 stories. So prior to the 2021 version of the building code, you can only do up to 4 stories in wood frame construction. So they've increased it. So it doesn't require that a 6-story building be built in wood. It just allows the flexibility for a developer to
And
use
the
that.
developer would prefer that? Like, is that beneficial to the developer?
There was, when this came out, there was a lot of discussion that it was going to be cheaper, that buildings would go up faster. In our experience, we designed one in Moncton, a 6-story wood frame building, because everybody said it was going to be a lot cheaper. And when the prices came back, it was a lot higher than concrete construction. So the developer hired us to redesign the entire building in concrete. So, I think it's very place specific. And it's very site specific, and it's training specific. The training just isn't there where it is on the West Coast. There's a good comfort level with wood frame construction it's slowly growing here.
Okay,
Yeah. So that was another reason for the 6-story. Yep.
okay, okay, thanks.
I have one last question. Then I would like to move to the motion, put it on the floor so that we could discuss it. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Speak really fast.
Okay, I just wanted to say that, as Devin knows, I'm sure, the tower residence was built before Wolfville had any planning controls whatsoever. No, it was open fishing. So I have to say, I'm really uncomfortable with 5 stories, 7 stories that looks like 5 stories. I just know in my heart that that's not the direction I want to go. Like maybe 6 stories that looks like 4. I don't know, but it just seems like we're pumping it up. And I know that red section is probably a good third of the whole development. And that's potentially a lot of stories. So I'm concerned.
Okay. Thank you. Devin?
Just very quickly, just so we cover the comments in the What We Heard report. So there was a section on livability. I would just say that there's a comment here about housing options I've already covered. And then there was a question about bedroom community. And I just, like, this is a map from the provincial government and a new department that they've created around servicing 1 hour from Halifax and coming up with a mobility strategy. So I think, like other issues, it's a little bit out of our control. I think Wolfville either already was or will be even more a bedroom community for HRM. I don't want it to be a binary thing between whether we are or we aren't. I think we are, for better or worse. I think, and the province has put a bullseye on it at this point. There were some other questions around timelines, some comments around street naming. We do have a process for street naming. We're going to start that process on the Kenny lands somewhat soon. We have a noise bylaw. And I think we've talked about habitat and ecological integrity a bit, so I won't talk about that. But those are the other pieces, and I'll stop.
Thank you. So I am going to need some assistance with this, the process, because we have a motion. My sense from our discussion is that there's not a full level of comfort with what may be missing from the motion. So I'm not sure what the process is. Can you assist?
My concern, I think we need to move this to council.
Right.
And so the fact that there are some things that we have not, that this committee hasn't weighed fully in on and agreed to, is of concern. This motion can go to council, but there will be things like height, and council will have to deal with height without any sense of if this committee's weigh-in. So, you know, this is, to me, this is too important. If this was a council meeting, we'd keep going till midnight.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
my
it would
feeling.
be going that
So-
long.
Okay, so is the question,
So
do we
my
keep
comment-
going with our discussion
Well,
until we have,
My sense
more
is we
fulsome?
cannot delay this until we can't delay this till the June PAC, and then because council only meets in July, I think we need to deal with this today. And it can go just like this. But then council, my concern is that the council will have this debate and it will go till midnight about height and other things. But we don't really have a sense of, it would be nice to say, well, this is what PAC felt about height or other issues.
Go ahead.
okay, so
That's right.
I guess I would just comment that I'm probably one of the PAC members that have been here for, this is my third and probably final term on PAC, but I've been I've had the pleasure of being here for 2 years and listening to this. And we have landed on building height a lot, and there's been a lot of discussion about it. And I think I was weighing in where we're just hearing Wendy in terms of comfort level. I'm very aware that we are outside of the municipal planning strategy, which really was quite freshly approved in 2020, right? And in my experience, in my government experience as well, I have seen where HRM is one of them, where they don't follow their municipal planning strategy. They seem to be often they will go outside of it, or they'll have another process. This is just not currently, but just some experience that I've had. And so I guess I'm very mindful that we're outside of the municipal planning strategy with this, not with the CCD, but with the building height that we're not.
We're not.
We're not.
Can I make a comment? I don't.
The CCD is within the municipal planning strategy that we were going to do that for this part of town,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And just within that small area within Kenny, we're saying we have an area of high density where we're going to go higher than 4 stories.
Yes.
In the original municipal planning strategy for everywhere else in town, if people wanted to be over 4 stories, they had to come in on a separate development agreement, right? So what we're kind of saying here now is, what we are saying is that in this new zone, you will be allowed to do that. You wouldn't need a development agreement.
Yeah, so the nature of a secondary plan is you're amending your planning strategy.
Right.
And so I think it's really important that we don't talk about 2 separate things as if we're going outside of the
Good
planning
point,
strategy.
yeah.
We're really not.
Yeah.
We're eyes wide open.
Yeah,
We're amending
no.
the planning strategy here. We're amending this to enable certain things. And I'm a little twitchy about that because the ultimate test for me is on any development application is it consistent with the municipal plan? And so we're trying to set up a structure that after the fact, someone could come in and say, you're outside. But right now we're having a policy discussion.
Right. And that's where again, choice of words is really important. So even I'm an example of it. I've been sitting here for 2 years, and my choice of words, I think I do understand what we're doing, but just by saying outside of versus inside of versus secondary versus a CCD, which has its own things, it can be confusing. But I guess my sense is on the building height. I agree that it's probably going to be an issue, but there's a certain point at which our political level, our councillors need to deal with it as well. And I'm not sure. I bet we do have new members here and with new ideas. So I'm comfortable with it, but at this point, after 2 years, but maybe
So-
we're not.
when you say you're comfortable with. Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor England?
I think I'm on the same lines as Mayor Donovan here. I don't like how the motion is because like if there's nothing specific that you're adding to it, and I see that you say more of a specific motion, I'm more comfortable with that motion going, what's the motion coming out of this committee to go there instead of just saying what it is. Is it what about the, the units per acre? Those are, all those things that we're changing. Can we have that specific in there? So when people are reading the package, they're going to know this is what the committee discussed and this is what we're proposing, instead of having, like Mayor Donovan said, we could be sitting there all night with that. So I think we need to have, that's just my opinion, we need to have a better motion to move forward. That's all.
So I would just suggest adding, like, you probably want council as a committee to consider broadly the comments in the What We Heard report, with specific attention being paid to. And
Building height.
you
Building
can
height.
list those and we can add those in.
I think that would be better, because there needs to be something specific coming out of this committee to know that people talked about that. I would feel more comfortable on that. But then how do we pass the motion tonight? We keep it like that? Or you're gonna add it now? Okay, okay. I was looking, I wasn't looking, it's too vague.
We have, Kelly, did you want to speak? Because you before Caroline.
Okay, sure. So I agree with everything that Jen just said about what we're doing and being more clear. But specifically on the building height, I think it was the first meeting that I came to back in February, where I remember we all discussed building height at length and went around and talked, and everybody weighed in on if they were in agreement with the higher density height or not. So just not sure how much we need to revisit that, or if we need to do that again, or
I think as counselor, we were concerned with the motion, that it wasn't.
that it just wasn't specific.
It wasn't specific in the motion.
Okay. All right.
Caroline, please.
Okay, I have 2 points. One is I don't know how this process of amending this vote, like I have a list of 5 things that I'm like, oh, I don't feel comfortable on these yet. Like, so my question, which might answer my list of 5 things written here, is once PAC provides a recommendation and this goes to council, is there anything that is going to come back to PAC to look at again?
No, this is.
Okay.
So
that makes, for me as for me as an individual, then that makes it imperative to me. I know I'm just one person and one vote, to say, like, I want to know that these 5 things are going to be
discussed.
caveat. Yeah, are going to be discussed. Yeah.
Okay. So
Just comment, well,
Mayor
I
Donovan?
think Devin is still ready. Just for Caroline and anybody else who is new to this. So this process, PAC is an advisory committee to council. Council can choose to listen to the comments or not. But it's, you are supposed to be representative of the community. And so you are important to council's understanding of issues. So this will go to committee of the whole for fulsome discussion. Then there's a public hearing that is done before council that members of the public or members, including members of PAC, can speak to council and say, I don't like this or whatever. Then it comes to council for final approval. So while this is presumably the last time it's at this committee, it's not the end of the road for anybody who's a resident of Wolfville. So.
okay.
I'm writing out of my notes, but
This, your points aren't there?
But I wasn't comfortable with the motion, even if I wanted to put it through or not, the way it was written, I was just like, oh, okay.
Okay,
So let's see.
Can I, well, and I appreciate that I'll put my things, but I would like PAC to like be in agreement with them. I would like to see that I would like it specifically listed that we're going to have some type of development agreement, or I don't know the terminology for that mixed use zone, for that village square, to have more control around services. I would like that. I personally would like to see that written, that process that Devin has indicated it might be possible will be attended to. There's a lot of things that came up around the built form, and I'm really grateful that we've indicated that in this process there is a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? We have a lot of say over built form. So, but there was a lot that came up around that, especially regarding the high density. So I just want to flag that for council or for everyone else that that is going to be looked at. There were a lot of, I don't want to say negative, but maybe constructive comments around built form. Yeah, density and built form. Yep. I would like to see that landscape protocol piece have a real ecological piece to it. So again, just that landscape architect and that work. I think that's essential in this time of ecological crisis. And would like to flag the non-market housing and the housing policy or housing review, whatever that was called, to happen in conversation with this. Sorry, I'm just wary of, I recognize that affordability is like a buzzword that underlies or, and I appreciate that. I feel that there's a lot of nuance that our planning department holds with keenly. So yeah, I just want to say that out loud, that that's important. Yeah, you got me.
Okay.
Do you want more, Devin?
No,
Go, Caroline.
Sorry, so now that we've listed these out, then when we make the motion though, how does it represent what our recommendations are as a committee? By just listing them, like.
That's why this gives me some.
So are you saying it might be better to say what we actually propose for building height and propose for the units per acre?
Well, otherwise there's no
So,
recommendation.
You're done and said, it doesn't mean that's gonna happen.
But if we don't even
But
say it, then
I think we should.
Okay,
put it
we have
in.
to.
So can I just add one thing? So to Kelly's point, like we had a substantial discussion around
Right, we
building
did.
height. We went around to every single person.
Right.
And I created the documents that are in front of you based on specific
information.
direction from this committee.
Something different.
No, well, he just told me that a 7-story will look like a 5-story.
But what he's saying is he's working within the 6-story height limit.
I don't
Yeah.
see how
And maybe into Rob's, question about the, the facade and the back of it, and if you have underground parking or whatever, so like because I said, oh, council hasn't agreed on that yet, but so I don't think he was saying 7 stories. I think into how Rob described it, that's what he had meant, like a 7-story building. And he didn't say in this land, he said a 7-story building. Well, I guess it would be that grade on that type of grade would look like a 5 if for context.
It's just what he
So-
wants. doesn't
Yes,
matter.
that's what he wants. That's what he wants.
But-
But the recommendation that we talked about, like Devin said, we all went around here and I don't have any, and we did discuss it. That's a fact.
Yeah.
But I think the question is, should it not be in the motion of what
So-
committee suggested to council?
I would say if there's amendments that you want to the document, that the latest version of the secondary plan, if the committee's will is to change the density to something else, we really should say that. I've took direction from this committee to lower the density.
Exactly.
The first iteration of this was 22 units per
And we've
acre.
done that.
I've lowered it to 16.
Yeah.
But that's even higher than that's in our, that's right now though, right? It's 10. It went from 10.
Minimum of 10.
Yeah.
Minimum of 10.
Yeah.
So has to be discussed too, right? I mean,
I think that those
Or nothing.
documents did indicate 10 is the minimum, not the maximum.
okay.
And we've said maximum is going to be 16,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, and we were up to-
Anything,
and we
anything
were up to
beyond
20
that.
at one point.
Yeah.
You were-
I am concerned that we have had these thorough discussions on things like height and other. It has to go to council to have this full discussion now, because I don't think we can continue that. We have had our input. Devon has moved forward. A huge amount of work has been done on the input that we've provided. I don't think now we can just say, okay, well, now we want to go back to 5 or whatever. I don't think that would be fair at all.
Oh, I agree with that. I
So,
think- yeah.
so we've had those discussions. my question is, by highlighting these, what is the message to council?
Yeah. I was
I
gonna
just
say,
don't
I don't,
understand.
I
I
feel
mean,
like we
I-
haven't done our work if it's gonna go like that.
Yeah,
As
I-
a committee member, I'm like, wow.
So to be honest, we are, council has access to what we heard, to our discussions, and that the work that Devon has done really reflects, particularly around density and height, things that we have discussed quite thoroughly. I think as members of council, these are issues that we've heard, because that comes out of the report that we all have access to in terms of what we've heard. I think then it's our responsibility at that point to take these into account. I do not see the advantage personally of listing these in connection to this motion at this moment, because if we list these now, it suggests to me that we have not had thorough discussions at this table on all of these topics, and I don't think that's an accurate reflection of the discussions that we've had.
So how do we,
So-
how do we?
Sorry, Mike?
And I think I'm in the same space where you are, is it, but like, I think if we start listing things, I understand why we would still want them to discuss those things, but we're also, I think the implication is everything else in those hundreds of pages
Yeah.
aren't worth talking
Aren't worth-
about, and council might want to talk about traffic or water flow and things that, like, I don't know, like, to me, there's a lot of stuff in that proposal, not just these areas that, you know, someone else will say is equally as important or could be a concern, right?
Well, now I'm of two minds, because I think I appreciate that what you're saying, that like this is almost too high level, that it doesn't really say anything and might actually say something that's not helpful to council. And yet I also agree that I don't feel comfortable without some acknowledgement that the PAC has put a lot of thought and effort, and there are still areas that we want to give directive to council and staff to continue to work on, like glossing over and saying it's a positive recommendation to me without some of those highlighting some of those questions that because we're people with really caring hearts that are here thinking about this, you know, deserve saying. And whether that's a communications piece or not, like, but for me, that's a person, like, that feels important to acknowledge. So I don't know where we strike the balance here, but so yeah, Mayor, please help us.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I was wrong on the date. The special cow is on the May the 25th. And I think the hour and a half that's in my calendar is not way long enough. My concern is, and for some reason, I have no authority to get into the report that we were sent. I just keep getting a note that's saying I have no authority. So I don't know why I have to talk to David tomorrow. But I know we have talked about these things, but I came into this meeting and I still do not know what our view is on height. I'm still hearing different issues. I think that's going to be the most significant thing. So my concern, we can send this forward, and I think council is going to have to just debate it well into the evening, to the next morning, perhaps. Devon, I think for council, some of you, I know those things are in the report, but it is too long a report for me to know, since I can't even get into it, what we agree, what PAC agreed on with respect to height. I personally don't have a problem with the height. That it's not an issue. I just want to, you know, I don't want to be offside what the consensus of this committee was. And because the report is so long, those I think are important issues to have some kind of summary bullet points for council.
So just how I've dealt with some of these motions before, because this isn't our first time at the rodeo here doing this. So that list for me is what it's probably important to actually highlight. I can't go through the entire report with council. It's impossible. And so these, I mean, I hear you that you're still hearing, and we just had an open house where this is what we heard. And so I think it's unfair to the public if we're running a process, and generally, if they didn't say it was an issue, it's probably not an issue. But the latest version of this is a reflection of planning committee. Like I mean, I've really gone out of my way to make sure that it is, including building height. including the different types of housing. We've made fairly substantial changes to the entire road network based on this as well. And I'm not saying that we can continue changing things. I mean, that's not my call. So, but I think from my perspective, it is helpful to have a list of things, because at the end of the day, you have given a recommendation on building height. It's in the report. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in there. Or I would have written something else. We don't know what we don't know what we want for building height. Therefore, it needs to go to council. The committee's split on it. We've done things like that before, where PAC really couldn't. They didn't have a definitive position on something. But at the end of the day, it's council's responsibility to make the decision. So from my seat, it's helpful to have a list. I get what you're saying. It might reflect that you didn't go through it, but I think between the councilors that are on PAC, there's a continuity in the message and the story and all of the things that we've done over a substantial period of time. That if someone really wants to dig into it, all of these meetings are on our website. They could go back and watch this discussion. And I think it's good that we're struggling with this because it's important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. Wording is really important.
Sorry,
Actually, no, and
Beverly, and then.
I'm very strong about this because I want to get it right. It's
yeah,
important.
and I do too. And I wasn't choosing my words properly about what MPS versus CCD and whatnot. I hope I do understand it all after 2 years. And I feel that, you know, if I look at building height, I was like Wendy a few months back. I was really, really concerned about it. And I was really concerned about density too. So I'm thinking within this list, there's a couple of points that float to the top for me more than others. But the report itself has those sections as Devin is pointing out and it's written as such now. So that I feel that is our recommendation. Like if it's in the draft report and we have said we're okay with that in terms of density, we're okay with, what are we at now? 15, 16, but I remember that meeting where it was a lot of discussion. And, you know, I thought that we were making, you know, that we had quorum when it came to what went into the report as we see it now. So, and I do understand that with the changes of committee members, it's hard, it's difficult for council and for Devin to kind of herd us along because we're coming at it with different levels of understanding and background on it.
Caroline, and then.
You're gonna let me speak.
My recommendation for this motion, or perhaps my question is, can we just add, I appreciate working in PowerPoint or whatever, but we don't have a lot of space to write, and we don't want it to go on forever, but can we just add a few indications? Because I read this and I appreciate that these are titles that are in all of our reports. Council will go and look at that, but a lot of what we're discussing is in response to what's in those reports, and there's certain framing that we are having around these that you may not get just from reading that. We have a particular opinion on some of these issues or a particular request. So I'm wondering if we can just add, I don't know if it's appropriate to a motion like this, you know, in brackets beside building height, you know, what is our concern? Or, you know, what is our specific ask for the village center in brackets, like services, you know, just something like that to frame it a little better. I don't know if that makes it more representative, but
I feel like
Okay.
the
Sorry,
work that you've
sorry.
done is,
Sorry.
oh, sorry.
Caroline, did you want to respond? Devin?
To me, there's the report represents PAC, and these issues could be tweaked. So around connectivity, I have showed you a slide today with an additional trail connection that I'm not going to go in and change things, but I hear you that there's a desire for that, and so that is being flagged. There's some nuance around building height that I think needs to be better understood. And I think everyone understands that. I hear you all in that. Same as density, understanding well, if you just read this motion and you don't read the report, well.
Some people don't.
But
Not us.
But we can't, I think it's impossible to get a motion that would stand on its own to represent a 2-year process. Like, I think that's very difficult. And to me, these are cues. And so, you know, I agree with the mayor in that we probably should beef up and take a sober look at the transitions between different areas in the plan.
Right.
And so that's why I included that when I was writing this down. The other thing to keep in mind, and this has happened before for new members, is the PAC may recommend something. And I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but this is possible that this, the staff recommendation may be different.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Right. And council weighs all of that.
Right.
And there's people in the community that have a different recommendation, so to speak. And so they have to take all of the information. And PAC is a very important input, but it is one input.
Yeah.
So.
Councillor Ingham.
Hello. So eventually we're gonna have to put this motion on the floor, right? So I'm
Yeah.
gonna ask
Would you like
Devin,
to do that?
would you like me to read that? So my question is to Devin, as he wrote this up and he knew that there might be some tweaks to it. Do you like this motion? Because we need to put a motion on the floor, like, then we need to vote on it, right? And again, it comes to council, we discuss it, staff makes a recommendation, but ultimately it's council's, decision on this. So this is a recommendation. I feel it's important to list some of these off. So we need to put a motion on the floor and it either
Go
gets
ahead.
defeated or it does. Okay, I'm going to put the motion on the floor.
Thank you.
I would move that PAC provide a positive recommendation to council on the East End secondary planning strategy and associated amendments to our planning documents, subject to council providing further consideration to the terms in that we heard report, giving particular attention to building height, density and built form, transitions between areas, connectivity, affordability and housing choice, village center area, ecological integrity, and communications.
Do I have a seconder for the motion, please? Thank you.
So it's on the floor.
So the motion's on the floor. Discussion on the motion.
So we.
I'm just looking at the wording, providing further consideration, I guess. And yeah, Devin, you've written these much more than, well, you've got experience with them. I guess it's providing further consideration. That really, that's really, I just fear that council may have a hard time getting through all of this you will be there. It's okay to be there till midnight, but I'm wondering if that's the words for the consideration or if it's providing, paying particular attention to the items as opposed to consideration, because consideration in my mind really says that we're not sure what's in that plan and we're just going to
Yeah.
bounce it over to you now to be
Yeah.
sure, right? So, with all due respect to the fact that we have some members of PAC maybe that are still feeling not 100% comfortable with it, but
It does raise doubt.
yes. So, is there a better wording there that people might agree with? I was saying particular attention to. Yeah. And is it just the what we heard report, or is it the entire, it is the draft report? Like, we've had a series of public engagement in the last 2 years on this process, and we've, I think we've done a good job, and the team has done an excellent job, and counselors in terms of moving this to the draft that we have. So I don't know if we want to be completely driven by 2 days last week. So I'm thinking, yeah, like
Yeah.
it's the report itself, like giving particular attention to the items within the latest draft report concerning and then, like you say, Devin, you do have a pretty fulsome list that you could pinpoint on for that meeting, where you're not necessarily going to be going through the report verbatim, but for counselors or for people that come to the committee to give comment, they'll know that these items are going to be raised.
Caroline?
Well, I think I appreciate this change of wording, but okay, maybe I'm just reading it again. I guess I was wary of taking out the what we heard, but I agree. I also wanted, of course we want council to look at everything, but you're only humans and have so much time. Yeah, I don't know where to stand on that. Never mind.
to the
Yes.
motion? Yes, you're
Yes,
comfortable?
I agree with them.
Okay,
Do I need to reread it?
no, I think it's fine. It's just minor. It's, the intent is still the same, so I just want to make sure.
So
yeah.
it's on the floor.
It's on the floor. Any other comments? So I'm going to call for the question. Okay, call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? So it passes unanimously. Thank you. It's me. Could I please have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Counselor Elliott, Mike seconds it. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Losing control. You're gonna kick me out.